Yes, now, and welcome back to episode 141 of the Top Loaded Podcast. And before I introduce my very special guest this week, just a massive thanks for the guys over at Third Down UK for powering up this episode of the Top Loaded Podcast. So if you need card supplies, custom card stands, great pressure preparation kits, they will have you covered over on their website, or check the link in the bio and use TTP10 at checkout for 10% off. And now, making his debut appearance, which has gone way too long, that's like an international call up where people have been yelling at the media for over 2 years. Introducing our very good friend, obviously, Joe, but Joe Mess, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm really good. Thank you so much for having me on. Great to be here. And as you say, yeah, been long overdue. Been looking forward to this for a long time.
Yeah, like I say, we were just talking about it's been way too long, and talking and thinking about all them shows that have been, and finally getting it done. So, obviously, before we talk about shows and collecting and all the good stuff,
Mm-hmm.
um, whereabouts did you get into the hobby? Because a lot of people might see you at shows, but just been wondering. I wonder how he got into the hobby.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I would say my story is probably a little bit different to other people. So I got in. I, like the hobby is obviously you define it how you want to define it, but I got
Mm,
into like cards as a business properly when I was about 12 or 13.
mm,
So I started selling on eBay when I was about 12. When I collected like match tacks and panini in the playgrounds, and I sort of, because I was so obsessed with completing, I'm quite an OCD guy. I'd like buy the cards I needed on eBay because I couldn't afford to open so many packs to get them, and I
yeah.
sell my duplicates from my own collections,
Mm,
like loads of people do now, but that was obviously quite an unusual thing to do back then. So I started doing that when I was 12, 13. Obviously collected since I was a kid, and then you probably know me. A lot of people I think know me because they've seen that stuff with Wimbledon and
yeah.
eBay. But actually, there was a lot happened before that. Before I got there, so I was like buying and selling on eBay when I was at school and when I was at university. And then when lockdown hit, which is when a lot of people obviously got into the hobby, obviously because I'd already been in the sort of in the car space for a little bit,
Mm,
my business took off because I obviously already had that like platform and infrastructure to an extent, and got that sponsorship deal and everything. And then it sort of went from there. Really, I was at the time selling a lot of TCG and Pokemon as well as football. And when the Logan Paul stuff happened, I sort of got out of TCG. I sold when it was
mm,
booming and have now pretty much fully moved into football as well as the stuff that I stock on my store. Obviously, I've been around on social media for a little while. You've probably seen me at a show, setting up with Dan, and around the guys like yourself and everyone else. And yeah, I've been probably doing the hobby properly now for 3 4 years, I'd say, maybe a bit longer. Um, and we all love it, and I love it every day. Never get bored of talking about it, packing up orders, sourcing cars is so much fun. And obviously shows for me are the pinnacle, like they're the
mm.
best bit of the hobby. Getting to put names to faces, meeting people, that's proper social aspect to it. I love it.
Yeah, I was going to say it's funny to think how much has changed. Obviously, no doubt, especially if you have been in the game a bit longer than some of us. But even just going to like the eBay aspect, which you started on, how much that has changed
Crazy.
since obviously you because even within if someone's only just been doing it about 6 months, the recent changes they've noticed significantly. But
Yeah.
surely the changes within like the last 10 years have been off the radar levels of
Yeah,
crazy.
mental. Like eBay, to be fair to them, have like done a good job of moving with the times. Because I remember back in the day when I used to use eBay,
Mm,
the interface was pretty dreadful. And if you go onto eBay now and Google like just match tags, you probably get like 40,000 listings.
yeah,
That just wasn't the case back then. You had like two or three consolidated dealers, like you do. They still exist today, like old school guys, dealers, proper dealers,
yeah.
and then a few people like me doing it sort of on the side. Whereas now the market is like come on leaps and bounds, and it's crazy to see. Like it was such a isolated community back then of a few people that didn't really know each other. It was just sort of doing it because you enjoyed it. Whereas now
Mm,
it's so interconnected, everyone knows each other, and it's great to see. Like I would definitely say when I was doing it at school, I loved doing it, but I was doing it on my own, and
mm,
not to say it was a weird thing to do because we all do it and love it, but it was definitely weirder because you didn't have that community connection that has developed since then. And now, obviously, we all do it. We all share it just to discuss it and share our ideas and stuff. And it's a lot more natural. But back then, it was kind of a weird thing. It was like not a People didn't really know what trading cards were. You didn't have the articles in the Sun, which you do now, about £30,000 cards. You had the stuff about the Panini albums, and that was the extent of most people's knowledge of football cards and stickers. It was the World Cup albums. Whereas now people are aware that actually this is a big business, and like there's big money in this sector, and we've seen that obviously now with Fnatic coming in and all that stuff. But back then, yeah, it was so different. And I remember like listing on eBay used to take ages, like so long, especially like the drop down listings and stuff that I do a lot of. Whereas now you can bash one out in 20 minutes, 10 minutes, but it took so long and it was so slow. And even like packing up, I used to like hand write all my letters because they didn't have like integrated shipping and stuff like that. I know that's really boring to some people, but for me, it was like game changing when they introduced that stuff.
Yeah, it's like I say, they've made it so much better. And obviously, I think the one thing to touch on there, especially, is that community aspect of that's the thing what's really grown within the last majorly 5 years, I would say, of everyone was liking cards by themselves or maybe in groups of 3 or 4, but now having these shows, social media is obviously a massive play, but that social aspect is what makes the whole industry. It's absolutely fantastic. We always laugh and joke with some of our mates that we actually talk to more people in the card world than outside of the card world now. It's crazy thing. But obviously for you as well at shows, how many times have you like, everyone says they have, it's so weird. You can be talking to someone and you don't realise who they are until they say their username. And then you're like, oh, yeah, I've spoke to you for the last 3 years, mate.
100%. Yeah, happens so much, doesn't it? Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, it's great thing. But obviously going to shows as well now, obviously because they've changed so much. And obviously from you as a vendor perspective, that it probably takes quite a few shows to really start working out the perfect formula. So have you started really working on now what to take to shows? Because we've seen it over the past however many shows now it's been at Sandown, of every table now has their like uniqueness. They know what they're doing, but also a lot more people now are having their best show after show because they know what to bring to the show and they know how to price stuff up at. Also know now trades are always a massive part of which I know you do as well.
100%. I think so. I've been to every Sandown show and I've set up every single one except the first one where I was just walking around. And the mistake I made is that I approached the London Card Show based on information that I gleaned from watching American card show videos. And I think a lot of us hadn't really identified that actually the UK hobby is way behind where America is. People aren't coming to card shows with thousands of pounds in their pocket. And then they're certainly not coming with like, we're thinking of buying you out or anything like that. It's much more about the collector. And I think I've learned, and it's taken me like a good 5 shows to properly, as you say, get this down to a T, that you need to be able to tailor what you have to the audience. And that sounds simple, but actually knowing your audience has been kind of quite a challenge because the first show I set up with, I did all right, but that was sort of because it was a new thing. But then as the London Car Show became more regular, for example, I realized that actually a lot of this stuff would move much better on PWCC or Fanatics or whatever than it would do at a UK car show because there aren't people coming here to make money. There are people coming here because they love cars and they want to buy their teams or buy their players, right? And it took me a while to work that out, to be honest with you. But as you say, my last London car show, which was only a few weeks ago, was my best because I recognise that the 95% of people that are buying from you are going to be buying because they want to add whatever they're buying to their collection. Very few people are there looking to make money. Additionally, people aren't interested, in my experience, in the prospects for the most part at car shows, with the exception of maybe the big two or three, which is probably like Bellingham or Yamal. People aren't interested in buying like Mukoko or players like that, if you know what I mean, Frimpong, players like that who are really good, but actually everyone at a London car show doesn't really watch or know that much about because they play in Germany or they play in France or wherever. Actually, what moves better than a Frimpong or a Mukoko is like a Bulldog auto because there'll be Sheffield United collectors there or Premier League collectors there or England collectors there. And working that out and being able to source appropriately has definitely been a journey. And I've moved from having 2 display cases of slabs to 1 display case of slabs, which actually has got, no, not even that, half a display case of shabs and expensive raw cards, loads and loads of flick throughs, as we were discussing before, loads of flick throughs, and then also some much more lower end slabs, which kids can buy or people can, it's low barrier to entry. And those move, moving one slab for 100 quid is harder than moving 5 slabs to 20 quid in my experience at London card shows. And that's that's something I definitely had to learn.
I was going to say, just picking up on about that, I think you put it perfectly. Of people do watch these American shows, and you've got 10K there, you've got 4K there, all these different cards, and the market in the UK is 95% collectors, and that's how it's always going to be, especially at the London card shows.
Yeah.
Every time you speak to someone, oh, what did you pick up? I picked this up for my PC. I've really been looking for this card, and that's what works so well. So when I remember a couple of shows ago, you was near the front doors of London as you walked in, just to the right.
Yeah.
And you had the 2 display cases with some incredible cards, which we'll come to in a second. But now, obviously, at the last one, you had your display case, you had flick through, you had slabs, and then you had your mystery packs as well. And as well, I've seen you're one of the main people to do it, and it's so easy. You've color coded every single top loader with a price on it, and it says the price above it. How much time do you think that actually helps people as well? Because rather than them have to go, how much is this, how much that, they literally look at the color, see it in front of them on the key in front of it. It seems so effortless for the consumer that it probably actually does help business as well.
100%. And as is with the case with lots of things in life, right? You get out of stuff what you put in. And, going through, you're right. So I've got a color code system for my flick throughs where a sticker corresponds to a price, and that's the cost of the cards. And it means you can get bargains as well, because if if the card's worth £8 and I've got a £5 sticker and a £10 sticker, I'm probably going to price it at £5. So you can get deals, but also you're right. Like, people can flick through, quickly work out, okay, 5, 10, 15, 20. That's how much it's going to cost. Could you do 18 maybe? Whereas having to negotiate every deal because you don't have a price on it becomes tiresome. And especially as well, as the London Card Show, for example, has developed and more people are coming, time is precious. And if you're spending 20 minutes negotiating with someone over a 20 or 30 pound card, you could be actually selling to other people that are waiting to be served or waiting to look through your flick throughs that then move on because they can't be bothered to wait. So actually, it's about efficiency as well as accuracy, if that makes sense. And 100%, I found that. And being I said to myself the last London Card Show was obviously at the start of November, and the one before that was in August or something, right? I said to myself after that August show, the day after my August show, I started buying for the following London Card Show, because getting the supply is the hardest thing to do, and getting that right is probably the hardest thing to do. But if you do get it right and put that effort in, so actually you spend long time sourcing, a long time top loading, a long time pricing, you get out of it what you put in. And it's taken me a while to work that out. And I think it's probably the same for everyone at the London Card Shows now. But definitely, you're right. It's all about the presentation. And as well, I think when the London Card Show first started, it was very, very, very informal. Like, people would just throw some stuff on the table, and and they would come for a chat and maybe to catch up on conversations they'd had online. Whereas now it's become quite commercial, and actually you got to stay ahead of the pack a bit and actually leverage that time that you're putting in, that money that you're spending on the accommodation and the travel and things. And for sure now it's become much more, you're competing now, not just, as a business, you're competing as well with for money and people to come up to your table. So making that as easy as possible is essential.
I was going to say, we've also had a conversation before. We've had it in the past, but also quite a few other people of the debate between raw and graded, especially at like the London Card Show. Because don't get me wrong, there's always upside of grading cards, and people prefer buying grade. But have you ever, like, when you've experienced these shows, and especially you've had quite a lot of either stock, whether it's raw or grade, do you find either one does well, or is it quite one depending on what it is? It comes down to the bottom line of that. Because I've seen it before with some of your like the cheaper so-called slabs that do really well, but then at the same time, a higher end slab can do well. At the end of the day, you've got to be a bit lucky. That it depends on who walks through that door on that day. Depends if that card goes or that one goes.
100%. There's a balance as well. So, for example, you're right. Like, I did really well on low end at the last card show, but I also got a guy who wasn't looking for Star Wars, who came up to my table because his kid wanted a Vinicius, and he ended up seeing my Darth Vader slab, which was like I ended up selling to him for like 350 quid or something. But he only saw that because his kid came up looking for Vinicius. Otherwise, he wouldn't have even bothered looking at my table. So there is a bit of luck to it. Don't get me wrong, but you can sort of spread your bets a bit and get lucky. Because, as you're right, as much as low end is important, that one sale obviously counts for maybe equivalent of 10 sales of lower end, and the margin's probably better. So there is a for sure an element of luck to it, but the more I don't know, was it Rory McIlroy who said the more you practice, the luckier you get, kind of thing, and that's definitely the case. And one thing I would say about Raw as well is, PSA has probably been as cheap and as quick as it ever has been. This is isn't necessarily the right strategy, but my strategy with grading now is very much that I will leave the meat on the bone for someone, especially if I'm selling it at a show, unless the meat on the bone is worth more than I would make on selling that card raw, if that makes sense. So say I buy a card for 30 quid, I can sell it for 50 quid raw or 100 quid in a 9, let's say. I'm going to get it graded. But if the card's 30 quid, if the card's 30 quid and I can sell it for 50 and it's worth maybe 60 or 70 in a slab, I leave the meat on the bone for someone else to take a chance of getting a 10. And I think you only really learn that skill of being able to work out what's worth grading and what's worth selling raw from experience and knowing handling this stuff, knowing what grades well, knowing what moves quickly. And to give you an example, like Arsenal, obviously the team you support, I don't bother grading any of that. As soon as I get Arsenal, that goes straight in the display case because that is the best moving team at the London Card Show, because it's got the most amount of fans and it's probably local to the most local team to the show, one of the most local teams to the show. Whereas like Liverpool, for example, yes, you could grade that, you could sell that raw, but that doesn't move as well at London Card Shows as Arsenal, in my experience, for example. So that's a card that I might consider getting grading if the time and the upside is worth it. So there are factors that you sort of don't think about when you first start out that you sort of have to learn on the job a bit.
Yeah. I think I think now it's like a perfect circle as well. Now with your YouTube content, obviously you work so close with Dan, who's always next to you as well.
Yeah.
But when you actually talk through the day, I think it helps a lot of people. And the last one I thought was fantastic for this, that even halfway through the video, you went through like what singles you'd already picked up, thinking about it, pricing it for the next day. But obviously, what made you go into that side of it as well, the YouTube side of it? Because I think we haven't got enough of it still in the UK that people showing shows, singles, boxes, whatever it may be. Content creation is such a brilliant thing for the hobby, but now all of you doing it, Dan, Jason, obviously El Toro doing it, it's so good to be able to watch their content. And despite being at the show, I will go and watch 7 people's perspectives of the show I was already at just to see what they thought.
Yeah, I love that. It's like how you watch the highlights of a game as soon as you've finished watching the game.
Yeah.
I think content creation is really important. I think sometimes we get people like you and I sometimes get a bit trapped in the bubble of thinking that, because we're quite knowledgeable, everyone else is. But actually, if you take a step back and you actually speak to most people at the London Card Show or on Instagram or on Facebook groups, there is still a huge knowledge or information gap in the hobby. People don't know how to price cards. People don't know how to check the prices of cards. People don't know how to sell cards or grade cards. And the way to address that information gap is through content. And I'm certainly not the biggest YouTuber in the space in the UK, but I do hope that what I get out there helps educate people a bit, because even just as simple as information as why I bought something is helpful to people, because it gives them sort of perspective on what to look for in a card, what not to look for, what to avoid, etc. And actually on that point as well, the recent London Car Show was the first show where I went there specifically looking to buy as much as I was looking to sell. And I know I mentioned earlier that we're behind America in sort of the card show culture here, but we're definitely moving towards there, because over the last few shows it's become a bit more sophisticated. There are people like to give you an example, like I was speaking to BHA Cards Ben before the start day on Sunday, and he bought as much as he'd sold on the Saturday. And I think there's a recognition now that these shows are not just to have a gander, but they're actually like an opportunity to sort of consolidate. So I've definitely used that opportunity in the last show, and I used my recent YouTube video to show people that side of it, because I'd obviously done a lot of the selling content vlog style stuff before. I want to show the buying side of it. Why have I bought this? Like, what do I see in this that makes it worth my time to buy, etc. So for sure, I think content is really important. It's the difficulty is with the industry, or the industry. I say the industry. The content creation scene in the UK is that the time you have to put into it for what you get out of it can at times be demotivating. Like, you put a lot of effort into a video and you don't really get much back, other than maybe a few views, which are great. Obviously, don't get me wrong, but in terms when we're all busy people, right, and time is quite precious, and I could definitely probably, if I was being completely honest with myself, I'd make more money not doing YouTube and doing, you know, more on my business than I would doing YouTube. But it's about that balancing that sort of like non-quantifiable output, which is, you know, helping people in the hobby, getting more awareness out there, and then the more directly quantifiable stuff like selling.
Yeah, I definitely could have put that better myself. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize as well when they see these content creators like yourself, Dan, whoever it may be, even like yourself, that you're doing it for the passion of the hobby, not always.
Yeah.
You see YouTube and you got obviously your full-time YouTubers, lovely jubbly, when like the Sidemen are making tens of thousands per view or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, the people in the hobby, because it's so small in the UK, it's all passion based. And that's what I love about the content. And I think that's why we've got to be so supportive in the community of people who are doing the content, is because they're doing this. They don't have to be doing it. They're doing it
Yeah.
because they want to be doing it. And you can really tell that, like your content, Dan's content, that there is a reason behind it. And that's why I think the content comes well across so well for the pair of you as well. So I think you work so well together, obviously being next to each other at the shows, but it's a perfect balance of helping each other out at the same time. But also the content is similar, but different in its own way. And that's what works so well.
Definitely. And me and Dan have said this in recent videos, but like if you look at Dan's YouTube, you look at my YouTube, they're pretty much, you know, don't get me wrong, we both put a lot of effort into our channels, but they're pretty much built as well on other people's goodwill. Like all of my vlogs are basically recorded by Dan, and I help him record lots of the content for his vlogs. You know, that is a purely like thing based on us being good mates, and actually, you know, Dan is now a really good mate, and I've got to know him through setting up at shows and us helping out, supporting each other. But I remember when Roth Cards was over in the UK for the London Car Show, he had a cameraman and, you know, a guy with a mic and everything. We don't have any of that stuff. I've still got a £5 mic that I bought on Amazon that's terrible, and you know, I use my iPhone to record the videos and stuff. So it's still so like raw, and there's still so much more we could do with the YouTube stuff. But I totally agree. I think none of that like production stuff is ever going to be a substitute for like good chemistry and good vibes. And I definitely think like I appreciate you saying that, because I do think like me and Dan have quite a good like it's funny because we're just basically two grown up idiots, but it is good fun.
Like that's what I think. That's what we love about the hobby, is because everyone's so genuine. It's literally what you're like in person, but you're just doing it on footage. It is
For sure.
great, and
I think that's something that the UK has over the US a bit, is that like authenticity. Like we are just being like our normal selves, just recording it.
yeah. But that's like the thing of like I've tried to encourage a few other people to do more of like vlog based stuff, and like you say, it's that time effort which people put in. But like I say, I'm a firm believer in like what you put into it, you will get out at some point. It might take a while,
Definitely.
but it will come out. But then there's quite an interesting question. Obviously, I know we've already mentioned there that someone like bought a Darth Vader card off of you. Obviously,
Yeah.
how does that go in comparison to with sports at like London Car Show? Because obviously, more people talk about TCG, but they forget about like the other like films and other cars there. Obviously, you're a massive Star Wars fan, which helps. But how does like the Star Wars do for you as well at like the car shows?
So that's a good question. I'm going to take your question and make it a bit more broad, actually, and just talk about my business strategy more generally.
Yeah.
So I've always been. My skill set is not in the mainstream stuff. Some people are really good at buying the stuff that's popular and selling the stuff that's popular, or like the mainstream stuff. You know, like the easy, like, you know, one of ones, or like a I don't know, random player like Sergio Ramos patches or autos, stuff that easy to move. I've never been as good as that. The something that I've always focused on is carving out sort of niches within our niche. And you look at the US market, which is, to be honest with you, always the template that you should use if you're ever looking at doing this stuff properly, is you look at how far on some of these sort of what I like to call sort of secondary markets are, like Star Wars, a bit like One Piece has sort of come from markets like that, not the mainstream baseball, basketball. Yeah, so I look at the US market as the template, and then I see that in the UK, obviously we're doing quite well with mainstream football or soccer, however you want to call it. we're doing quite well with Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh and all those established TCGs, but actually there's opportunity in sort of some of those subcategories which get less focus. And if you look at the Star Wars card market in the UK, despite being a market that's got incredibly high demand, there's very few people actually supplying this stuff. Which is, and so not only do I love it, so I'm passionate about it anyway, but actually you think about a show or you think about selling more strategically, it's ultimately about supply and demand, right? You're never going to win on soccer, but on supply, because there's always going to be loads of supply. You're going to win on demand, i.e. you've got the stuff that people want. Whereas on Star Wars, you only need maybe 4 or 5 interested customers to make it worth your time, because there's no one else doing it. So there's sort of that trade-off there. And that's something that I've identified in my business. And if you look at some of the stuff I sell, a lot of it isn't the sort of stuff that you probably is typically associated with like the hobby, but it's stuff that does well because there's it's easy to sort of establish a foothold in the market. And that's something I found with Star Wars. And as you say, notwithstanding, I'm also passionate about it. And I remember like during the last London Card Show, I sold a few Star Wars cards, probably to like only 3 or 4 buyers, but because they were concentrated on my table and there was no one else they could really buy from, I did pretty well, and my margins were pretty good. I had less competition on stuff, but obviously you do get less with football, and it is a little bit of a gamble. But I found it to be quite successful, and especially because one last point on that as well is Topps UK and Topps US, they get the same product for Star Wars, but there's less demand for it in the UK and more demand for it in the US. So your geography actually gives you an advantage, because you can buy stuff from the UK and sell it to the US for their higher prices, which is a really like big bonus. So, for example, the recent Star Wars Chrome 2024 set was going bananas in America, but no one was really talking about it in the UK. So when they dropped it in the UK, I bought a lot of boxes and flipped them to the US buyers on Facebook groups. Because there just wasn't that demand here, but there was that demand there. And that comes back to the information gaps and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's very well put, because we see it quite a lot. And another set that it kind of reminds me of is the Game of Thrones stuff as well, because there's got a big collector's base, but they made such a small amount of cards for it. Plus, hardly anyone has it, because a lot of the people, it's especially like the collector's market over here for football, but Star Wars, near enough everyone who's buying it is a collector. So a lot of it goes into certain hands and then it's off the market, and that's how it is. And it seems to be, when I've spoke to you in the past about it, it seems to be quite a lot of the same. Or someone will buy it and go, right, that's it done. That card will never emerge again. And it's so hard to supply that demand, like you're saying, with that low source of cards. That, all right, it's great that someone in America might have a whole table full, but well, you might be the only one in 4 London card shows with one, not alone one London card show, but a whole series of them.
Absolutely, yeah. And like one thing I graded something at the London Card Show, which was a Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator auto card. Like I don't need that card to be that rare, because I know that there's not going to be no one else selling it at the London Card Show or generally. So I only need to find one person, the right buyer, and I can pretty much secure a sale because I don't have that competition. Whereas if I'm selling I don't know, an Odegaard Prism card, there's going to be probably 10 other people in the London Card Show with a similar sort of card. So it's just being able to think about that supply and demand side to it, which is sometimes probably a little bit overlooked. Actually, is like being able to assess that a bit.
I was going to say, because when I walk the floor of a London Car Show, no way you do the same thing as well. You kind of make a mental note of what kind of cards each table's got. / what I kind of do is see what their scarcer items are, what's something different about each table, and very rarely, like you'll see someone go, "Wow, actually, I have a look at that." I see a table once that had a load of different Game of Thrones cards, and I was like, "Wow, that's caught my attention because that's different." Like there was a Doctor Who set that come out, so someone had that, and but like the same for you. I'm not a massive Star Wars fan, but I will see it and I'll be like, actually, you know what? I'm going to look at that because it is different and it draws people in very well.
Sure.
And that's what, for me, I collect like cricket as well as like Team GB. So if I see some with that, I'm going to naturally just have a look. But then you go, oh, they've got that. Oh, wait a minute, they've got this as well. And it's such a good way to draw people in, is having that different stock.
For sure. I've said to myself now, like, and I think I said it in my recent YouTube video, you should never go more than 2 shows in a row with the same stuff in your display case. You got to rotate it, because people get bored. You got to rotate it, and I think like that's something that happens in America all the time, but it's probably less of a thing here. It's you gotta move through stuff. If it's not selling at a show, sell it elsewhere. Move in, because otherwise you'll as you say, people will stop coming over to the table.
Yeah, I think as well, when obviously we've seen you as the eBay seller, we've seen you as that card show, we've seen you on YouTube, but do you actually have a much of a obviously personal collection as well? Because I think it gets lost a lot with people. Of some people
Yeah.
don't actually realise what people collect or what they look after. I find it quite intriguing when I speak to people that I might have seen at 7 London card shows, and then I go, "Oh, what do you collect?" And they come out. Sometimes people come out and be like, "This," and I was like, "No, never knew that." And like, how
Yeah.
have I never known that?
Yeah, so get ready, right? So this is pretty neat. So my passion for collecting is very much in the chase. I like being able to like set myself a collecting goal and then like work really hard towards that completing that collecting goal. So I collect like a select few sets by an Italian publisher called GE Fabri and another one called Eagle Moss, who they later merged. So I'm collecting specific sets. Doctor Who sets, James Bond sets. You'll see some of them listed on my shop. Spider-Man sets, but these sets are not they're not that expensive. But this stuff is
Mm.
incredibly rare. So, for example, like this Spider-Man set had a Russian version, which you can only get in Russia. And obviously, since the war, that stuff's even harder to find. Like I had to buy stuff from like collectors in Ukraine who've got it through Russia. It's crazy. And the James Bond stuff I collect, for example, has got a French version, but they only trialed the French version in a certain region of France where there wasn't that many made. And it's not that people, not those cards are thousands of pounds, but people don't know about it. So finding those versions is really like rare. So I'm really into that like variant collecting as well, which is why I love vintage so much, is because you can get really into that. Like, okay, yeah, that card's rare, but I have that same card in a rarer version, and I love that sort of stuff. So that's where I collect. And actually, a business tip for you is, in my opinion, is if you're going to have a business selling cards, you're probably coming into it because you enjoy collecting cards. Don't use your business to satisfy your collecting itch. Have something on the side that satisfies that itch. Otherwise, you'll find the two sort of blurring. Make sure that you're satisfying that itch elsewhere, so that it doesn't leak into what you're doing with your business.
As I say, it can be very murky, like lines at sometimes where, especially if you start buying stuff, you're like, oh, I know X player is going to do really well because I collect them. Oh, wait a minute, I might as well just keep that card. Oh, wait,
Yeah,
now
exactly.
now your margins are going all over the place. And
yeah, or you buy a card like, oh yeah, I'm buying this to sell, but actually you're not buying it to sell. You're just telling yourself that actually you're buying it because you want it.
Yeah, I think we've all been there before. Oh yeah,
Definitely, I've been there before.
I've done it before. Oh yeah, I would definitely might move this card on. Nope, I don't think that card has even seen daylight for the last like 2 years.
Exactly.
It just happens. It's so intriguing to see, and like
Exactly.
even there, just talking about that, I find it fascinating because we have discussions about vintage all the time on the podcast, especially with good friends who've been on before. But I've always seen it on your store, especially of a mixture. It's not obviously that's what we've said it before, like having a good variety of different products, but there's so many different like players. Obviously, you've got the bigger name players, but with vintage, sometimes you might not even know the player, but the card looks, or the card, the sticker, the insert, the cutout, wherever it may be from, just looks stunning. And then
Yeah.
that's what draws you in, because you
Yeah.
can literally have the same set over 50 years, once every 10 years, but because the artwork changes, you go to some of the 60s, 70s, it's so vibrant and colourful. But then you go prior to that, and it's so blocked because they literally just a printing mechanism. And then it goes into the 90s, thousands, where it was done more machine. It's incredible to see like history through the vintage as well.
Definitely. And don't underestimate the opportunity in vintage. The way I sort of like see the market for vintage sometimes is like, vintage is like a safe investment. It's like a low interest rate bank account. Like, you're guaranteed returns, but they're not going to be high returns because this stuff is limited supply. You're only ever going to have a certain amount of it in circulation, so you can never really be harmed by it being printed more. So you're guaranteed that you're guaranteed that's because that supply is guaranteed. You're guaranteed demand for it, and prices might rise slowly. Whereas in the modern side, you can buy stuff and flip it really quickly. Like, you can buy with Yamal and flip it at Yamal if he scores in the World Cup or whatever. But then there's also the huge potential for downside if that player gets injured. Just look at Ansu Fati as an example, right? So vintage is very much like a much more safer investment, but it's obviously low returns, and I find that quite attractive. I'm quite risk averse, so I find that quite attractive. And as you say, additionally to that, as someone who's really interested in set collecting, like a lot of demand for vintage comes from set collectors and people looking to complete early sets of stuff, which is where you get these scenarios where players that aren't even really well known become quite valuable because they're rare in that set. And that's what really interests me. And then I think this gets lost in modern a little bit, and to an extent, I mean, you look at Inception as an example of maybe where this isn't the case, but eye appeal and how good something looks is a major factor in a card's price in vintage. Whereas in modern, it can get a little bit lost in the player or the auto or the numbering. When actually that card it probably looks all right, but it doesn't look amazing. Whereas you can get some really, really, really amazing looking vintage cards, and I love that sort of that chase.
Yeah, as I say, just piggybacking on that, because I was literally talking about this to someone the other day. I recently picked up a Dennis Bergkamp rookie sticker in a PSA 1 because on the back it's where it's like something's caught on it and it's pulled the paper off a tiny bit, but the front is generally aesthetically, it's incredible. The front of it, you're looking like a 7, but the back of it makes it a 1. And people don't realize, especially when you go even further back than like the 90s, you go back to the 50, you can have a PSA 1 that generally looks superb, but there might be a slight pen mark or something on the back of it. But then a PSA 4, look at it and it's all faded, and you're like, But what? And then people go, why? I don't get why the 1 is so much more expensive than like a 3. But it's all on that eye appeal, and obviously that's what PWCC did very well before. Obviously now it's like merged and everything like that. Of eye appeal is so key for the older stuff, but. Even like saying that for me personally, for the women's stuff, Sapphire just looks incredible. So I'm more likely to buy it. And it don't matter if it's a brand new $100 card or a $1,000 vintage card. Eye appeal is what it comes down to at the end of the day.
Yeah, we're simple creatures, and we're attracted to the stuff that we find attractive. And you're right, that is why modern sets traditionally like Sapphire do so well, because they're so attractive. And to your point about eye appeal, like a big thing in the vintage collector space is that you buy the card, not the grade, because vintage grading is so much more, it's so much less linear than modern grading. You know, you grade a modern card, it's either a gem mint 10 or it's got a couple of corner dings, so it might be a 9 or maybe an 8. Whereas there's so many different factors that play in vintage that just aren't a thing in modern. Like you don't really get bent modern cards or modern cards with a pen on them or anything like that. Whereas that's a thing in vintage. So it's buying the card, not the grade. And yeah, coming back to the education piece again, like that's something people need to understand is you can have a PSA 1 that's worth more than a PSA 4 because it looks better. And that's something I don't think people have quite sort of worked out in their heads yet because they're in the modern mindset, but it's a different market than vintage.
I was going to say, especially when it comes to like PC, especially like I was just looking here, I've got a few cards out, but some of the vintage stuff I buy, even though it's not truly vintage of mine, it's like 1980s stuff, like the Arsene Wenger Panini Foots through from like the early 80s to late like to 1990. The colours on them each year, people don't understand it until I show them it. Like one year it could be a light blue and a black, and then the next year it's like green and red, and then the next year it's just pure white. And how their artwork is done on some of these is
Amazing.
They put so much time and effort, but they had so much less technology. It's so funny how now you've got the technology that you could do endless possibilities, and it's quite standard, quite easy copy and paste. Whereas back then when they had to change the plate itself, slightly change the colouring on it, it's just that's what you appreciate with it as well. You're like, this is actually unbelievable how this thing was made in 1923. Didn't even have any technology of what we've got now, but it looks better. Then I go, I've just picked out this new Panini stick, and I'm like, it's just not the same.
100%. Couldn't agree more. And like you look at a card that survived 2 world wars, and it's like I still find this thing is good to look at now. It's unbelievable. And I think maybe without getting too controversial, Topps and Panini need to remember that it's about quality as well as quantity.
I don't think anyone's going to disagree with you there, especially with some of the. I don't even get into it. There's a lot of the paper sets and stuff like that now. If you pull it out the pack and it's already damaged, and you're like, well, what am I meant to do with this card now?
Yeah, for for
It
sure.
is worrying to see. But obviously, we've spoken about all of that now. But obviously, I know the big one for you is the London Car Show every 3 months. I know by the time we even mention it, we'll be back at Sandown in February. But
Yeah.
any other car shows you've ever wanted to get out to go to see, try and see what the market is, different places? Because I find that quite interesting when I have ventured to different shows. It is very different in every show.
Definitely. I mean, I wanted to go to the Milton Keynes Sports Car Social for forever, but I just haven't been able to for whatever reason. I'm thinking I might actually pull the trigger and go to the Dublin Car Show coming up soon. I've heard that's great things, and as you say, like that will be a completely new experience in terms of collector base and demographics there. But I think the biggest one of all is I need to do a European or international car show at some point because that will be just incredible experience. I think. I mean, it'd be fun to go abroad, and everything anyway. But being able to sort of speak to collectors who have different interests and have different, that there'll be something I always find crazy is like I sold some cards to a German collector at the last London card show, but which were like I probably would never have sold to an English person. But they were like low numbered rookies or autos of players that played in the Bundesliga, and it's like being able to see that side of it and where the rest of Europe is quite exciting. And also, if we're to grow as a hobby, there is a sort of ceiling to how we're going to do it in the UK. It's actually about going internationally. And you look at America now, and obviously America's a much bigger country than the UK, etc., etc. But also, those American YouTubers now are bigger than just America. Like people from the UK watch them, people from Germany watch them, people from the rest of the world, like Asia, watch them as well. And breaking into that and making it sort of one universal thing and not just these like closed, not closed communities, but sub communities within the bigger community, and actually breaking down those barriers is definitely a route for me. And I think for sure as well, I know you agree with me on this one because you're a sociable guy, but it's about forming relationships and making connections in the hobby as well. And those are only going to serve you positively going forward. And I think doing that on a bigger scale is definitely probably the next step for me when it comes to car shows, and actually getting myself out there amongst other people in other markets and other parts of the world is for sure something I want to do.
Yeah, I was going to say, like touching on that Dublin card show, like the thought of it's nice when you speak to people at card shows, are great, but when you can, like even the night before of it, like you just go for a Guinness down with one of the honestly, one of the 1,000 pubs in Dublin. That 20 minutes, 30 minutes, hour, 2 hours, whatever it may be, you can form that relationship that it's so easy to talk from one side of the table to another. But when you're in that social aspect away from cards, like you say, you talk. How many times you think about it, you talk to someone in the card world about just life. You don't do it. You just talk about cards, and that's what would be so nice. And we done it briefly before the show, but you're so always inundated with cards, especially at shows, that you forget that everyone's got a life to live as well with cards, but you don't really know what people are doing outside of it.
For sure. And I'm sure you get this with work as well, but like I don't know, people listening to it, there's probably have like a normal sort of day jobs as well, and you have these like networking events and stuff like that, which I always go to. But you never actually form a meaningful relationship with people at these networking events.
Yeah.
It's the pub afterwards where you form a meaningful relationship. Like I remember I was at like a property conference last year, and I had this like young person's networking event, which was all good. We're talking about what we do and stuff. It's pretty boring stuff, really. But then it's people who stay back afterwards and have a few to drink and get a bit personal. That's when you form a meaningful relationship. Actually, it's not that sort of surface level. Who are you? What do you do? Stuff. It's that like, oh, like who do you support? Like what are you doing on the weekend? That sort of stuff. That's properly how you form relationships. And you couldn't. And as you say at car shows, that's where you do it. Like yes, you can speak to someone on Instagram. Yes, you can speak to someone online for a certain amount of time. But that is never ever going to be a substitute for getting in front of them. And as you say, having a Guinness, or in my case, having a lager, because like hot take, I actually don't really like Guinness. And I know, sorry. And
invite decline to the Dublin card show, everyone.
Yeah, and then having that meaningful relationship, for sure, I agree with that.
Yeah, like I say, even I think I can't remember what show I went to, Sports Card Social recently. I ended up, there was a cricket on in the bar we was in. It was great watching that. But then we ended up talking about golf, and we didn't realise how many people played golf. You're just like, well, it's so many things that combine people, and you're like, and then as we were talking, it was like, oh, we should like arrange something in the future. And you're like, well, it actually makes sense to. And like I say, it's quite easy. Then you form like a little group, and you're like, oh. But we always say we should meet outside of the card show, but it's so easy to get lost with it all. But like I say, it's always it's great to have this community growing and grow, because it does seem every show, like even if 2 people are introduced to it, it's slow, and then they bring 2 people. By the time you know, in 3 years' time in the UK, the shows will be they're crazy as it stands, but it might be a case of in like 2 years' time, it's definitely going to need potentially a double the size venue, because how many people will start their own business? How many more tables will be needed? And it is promising the future for the UK.
100%. It's really, really exciting, and you're right. Like the potential for like making this a proper. I mean, it's getting proper now, as you say. You're right. It's
Yeah.
like it's serious stuff now, but it's only going to get the trajectory is only upwards. And if there's one thing I regret more than anything, actually, it's not getting in on creating a show early doors, because now obviously we've got the established shows in the calendar and stuff,
Yeah.
and the seeding for those guys is massive. Like their potential for them is huge, because I think one day probably we could probably get the Excel Center for a car show one day, and that is huge, really
Yeah.
exciting. And yeah, to your point about doing stuff outside of cars, that's really exciting. And like if actually we were saying earlier about how like my friendship with Dan has meant that we've sort of been able to support each other with our content and stuff. You can't really find someone to help you do that without making a meaningful relationship first, because you're never gonna someone you meet once every now and then. They might help you with the video, but you're never going to get that sort of authenticity of a relationship without having that relationship. And yeah, the opportunities are endless. And as well, I wouldn't be surprised if people in the card hobby now are not forming relationships which are actually going to become quite beneficial from a business perspective in the future. Creating businesses together, or content platforms together. Well, like you've done, to be fair, like creating content platforms, like you've done with the Top Loaded podcast, like a bunch of guys which none of you knew each other, but you came together through cards, and now you actually got something serious going on. I think we're going to see more and more of that as we grow in the hobby.
Like I say, I think it's very well put, and the future is very optimistic. I spoke about potential future shows. Obviously, for your actual car business itself, is there any future plans you've got for it, or is it a case of just trying to upscale what you're doing at the moment, potentially work on a few bits? But future is optimistic for cards, and like you say, you've been in it for the long run already, so it must be quite interesting for you, especially that you've seen how much difference it's got, and still how much more room to growth there is.
For sure, actually, to be honest with you, it's a topic I've been thinking about a lot recently. Is obviously I as is the case with most people in the hobby, have gotten a quote normal job, full-time job, 9 to 5 kind of thing. But the opportunity is there to make cards a full-time thing, and that is something that I do have to think about, because I would say now with my business, really, if I'm being completely honest, like it's at I'm at my maximum in terms of how much I can do on my business outside of work, like weekends, evenings, etc. Like I can't really, there's not enough hours in the day to do it much more when I've got my other commitments and my job and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's the question. But I think because of where we are in the hobby right now, that's going to be a leap of faith more than anything else.
Yeah.
And it's going to be, I think it's going to be a little while before people are going to be able to. Well, I know there are some people doing cards full time now, but there's going to be a while before a good amount of people are going to be able to take that leap of faith, because I don't think we're quite yet at the point where cards are, unless you're there is the opportunity to be card full time, but to make that a sustainable long-term thing, I think we're not quite there yet for people like me who do buying and selling on the side. But that said, it's definitely something that is, I'm lucky enough to be in a position where that could be a thing for me in the future, and that's obviously really exciting.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's no doubt that how we've seen the growth of, obviously, just for me personally, since like seeing your first eBay post. I remember buying a card off you. You probably didn't even remember at the time. Probably didn't even know it was me buying the card, but now like it's
Yeah, I
interesting.
love it.
But like I say, for anyone who obviously might not follow you on socials or know whereabouts to find you on eBay, even YouTube, like whereabouts should they find you and go and have a look, see what stuff you might have? Who knows? There might be a card on their eBay right now that they're looking for, but they just don't know that it's on there.
Yeah, definitely. So I've sort of recently, not fairly recently, I separated out my personal card stuff from my business stuff, because I was sort of losing customers because they didn't really understand the sort of the crossover between my business and my personal account. So I go by JJJ cards on Instagram. So that's 3Js.cards. That's my personal Instagram account, where you can see sort of what I'm getting up to at shows, what I'm buying for my personal collection, what I'm doing day to day in the hobby. And then my business is called Jojo JMS, which has been going for, well, we're looking at over 10 years now, but it's only been going properly for much less than that. I was doing it when I was a kid. I wasn't doing it seriously. So you can find me at JJJ Cards on Instagram and YouTube, where I post my card show vlogs and things like that, which my recent London card show vlog's doing quite well, which is I'm really, really happy about, because I wasn't sure if people would be interested in the buying side, but I think it's done well, so that's great. And then if you're interested in my business, you can search Jojo JMS. I've got a separate Instagram page for that for any business queries, and also I've got an eBay page. And I did have a website, but that's currently down, but that'll be back soon. And I think sorry, to go back to the question as well about next steps for my business as well. I do think I probably need to get into TikTok. I've sort of been avoiding it because
I've been saying the same thing for about a year now. I don't want to do it, but I need to be doing it.
Exactly. I don't want to do it. Being completely transparent, I think it's a bit cringe, but I do have to do it because there's a huge like a group of people there that I can't reach elsewhere, which I can reach on TikTok. So that is something I need to do. So watch that space as well, I suppose.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you haven't watched the latest vlog, I definitely do give it a watch. It is a fantastic perspective on the show and gives you that different aspect of learning as well whilst you're watching it, which is just great. But like I say, massive thanks for joining us. All the links that you need will be down below. But I would say recommend checking out the channel, checking out the eBay page, checking out the Instagrams. But most importantly, thank you for joining us. And no doubt this will not be the last time we get you on an episode.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure, and just a massive thank you again for third down. For this, for powering up this episode of Top Load Podcast, whether you need card sounds, custom spray kits, whatever it may be, there have you covered. Use TTP10 at checkout for 10% off. But hopefully everyone out there is staying well, doing safe, buying, selling, trading, and all that good jazz. But most importantly, happy hobbying and good night.